Can folks on the line mute their laptop or their phone, please? Thank you. It's been a while since I've had the opportunity to really speak with many of you or see you. For those of you who can recall, way back in January of this past year, I was fortunate enough to have been able to join you at your conference in January in Las Vegas. And part of the commitment that I made to you all at the conference was that we had actually just recently developed an analytics maturity assessment. And one of the things that I had spoken about during my presentation was that we would love and welcome the opportunity to actually collect the individual assessments from all of the folks that are in your cohort with an eye towards actually providing you with some insight around how you all stack up against one another. Thanks to the help of Derek and Todd and many others, we've had the ability to collect enough assessments to be able to report back meaningfully on what the assessment actually tells us relative to a benchmark. So the purpose of this discussion here is actually to take you through and reacquaint you with the benchmark, talk to you a little bit about how we think about it, and then to provide back to you some of the insights that we found from having had the opportunity to evaluate all of the individual assessments that we've collected. So I am actually joined on the call with two of my colleagues, Steve Atkins, who is an account executive working with us, who covers all of the Lutheran colleges as part of our team from a sales perspective, and Jeff Morgan, who's one of our product managers. And you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't say Jeff did all of the hard work here. He actually collected all the assessments and conducted the analysis. So I thought it would be very appropriate to include him in the call to talk to you a little bit about how we went about doing that. So we're going to start first by just taking a step back and talking to you about what it is that we did and how we approached this assessment. And then we're going to dig into some of what came back in evaluating the collective assessments across the group and provide you with some insights in some of the discrete areas that the assessment evaluated. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jeff just to talk to you a little bit about the assessment itself.
Thanks, Dave. So yeah, we appreciate everyone's attendance here, and we appreciate you're willing to fill out these surveys. As you can see here, it's designed to enable folks like yourself to align high-level views of your current capabilities with institutions that also make up your same group. As we get into the different charts and the actual analysis, we'll be focused on these four primary areas, and which I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing me. Hopefully this is a little bit better. And if anybody could please mute their lines, we'd appreciate it. But yeah, the four primary analytical capabilities that we'll be looking at are what are your key strengths, which areas should be higher priorities, and where in certain areas you may be potentially over allocating parts of your efforts or resources, and also identifying some areas for improvements. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention that this was developed in part with some help from our friends at the International Institute for Analytics, who are the leaders in this space and this type of analysis, especially in the corporate world and private sector.
So just taking a step back, to actually talk a little bit about why this even matters in the first place. And Jeff had alluded to the private sector in his previous slide, and there's a tremendous body of evidence that actually suggests that certainly in the private sector that more mature analytics companies actually perform better. And over a 10-year period, you can see that the more mature by stage, and stage 4 would be the more mature analytics company in the graph on the slide, significantly outperforms others that were evaluated as part of this particular evaluation. And the reason for that is that inherently data-driven and analytically savvy companies are using data to focus more on what their customer wants, needs, and desires. And through better understanding or having a deeper understanding of their customer, they're able to engage with that customer and meet those needs in a way that is different and better than their competitors. I think probably the most extreme example to use to illustrate this point is probably in making a comparison between Amazon and Sears today. Amazon obviously has grown up as a digitally native company that uses data to anticipate what we all want, need, and desire. In fact, there are times where I get something sent to me that I have purchased, and sometimes I'm like, I don't think I actually purchased it, but I really did want that. And sometimes that's my wife buying things that I think she anticipates what I want very well. But needless to say, Amazon is very, very good at figuring out what we all want, whether it's in helping us to anticipate music that we want to listen to, or in actually suggesting a purchase that we should make when we're on their site. It's pretty incredible what they do with data and how they use it to be more customer centric. Sears, on the other hand, is a company that is in a death spiral. And some of what they have is very much built on legacy and on really a business model that is having a difficult time competing with the likes of an Amazon. So I think that's probably the prime example. And as a company at Othot, really our underlying premise in actually building a company is that we thought, why in the world can't we take some of these more advanced applications of analytics that are playing out in the corporate world and creating competitive advantage in the corporate world and take it into higher education.
And to set up, the survey itself and how we were looking at administering the survey. First things first, we want to point out that generally, most of the respondents here, each of your institutions, only provided one survey response. So it's important to mention that we're getting one person's view of the analytical capabilities from each institution. If we were able to get more folks from each institution to provide their same insights and feelings on analytical capabilities from each institution, it may normalize results and give us a better overall survey for you. Just want to point that out because this isn't an especially scientific survey, but it's really useful for the different points that we mentioned earlier, identifying key strengths and priorities and opportunities. As you all know, this survey in particular was administered to only the colleges and universities that are affiliated with the ELCA. So we're making direct comparisons for everything here. It was available to executives in the areas that you see: enrollment, retention, student success, finance, and IT. And we did get a nice mix of different people in different roles for this. And lastly, we appreciate that we had 16 different institutions actually complete the survey, which is the majority of the total ELCA, and we appreciate that because it made for a better survey. So each of the main sections or pillars of questions are on the screen now. These are the high-level categories of which there were specific questions underneath each. We went ahead and for everything within this presentation, color-coded based on the different pillars. So anytime you see that sort of pink color, that's going to be something that's related to data quality, for example. Each of these we found to be, we call them pillars because, they're the most important high-level topics when assessing an institution's analytical capabilities. So you can all read what they say there, but I'll go through what they are at the top. Data quality, high-impact questions. For those who aren't currently working with Othot or maybe haven't had a demo with us, that's an Othot-specific term that's actually built into our platform. And I'll read this one. It's the critical questions that can be answered through advanced analytics and impact our organization. An example of that would be, in our case, what's the likelihood a student will enroll? But then we would consider that to be a very high impact question. Within this, we ask certain questions, which we'll see on the next slide about, finding more best fit students and how your institution views that as how important it is versus how effective you are at it. Just to finish up here, the other three are leadership focus, your skills and abilities when it comes to analytics, and the tools that you have available to you for advanced analytics. And sticking with this, these are all the questions, or at least shortened versions of each question that you were asked. And again, all of these pillars have below them, these were the questions that were asked. And what we asked you to do and what you did was first tell us how important on a scale from 1 to 5 you view each of these. And then from there, we had you tell us how effective you believe you are at that. So as we get into the more deep dive in the analysis, this will become a little bit more tangible. But these were all the capabilities that fall under the pillars that helped us to assess an overall score and how analytically competitive your institution is.
So getting into some of the results, this is kind of the fun stuff. What we wanted to do was to start first by looking across the cohort of the 6 evaluations to see, from a prioritization perspective, what you all deem collectively to be the top 7 most important capabilities and the top 7 most effective capabilities. And you'll see that there's a nice distribution across the pillars with respect to capabilities that are most important. Clearly, finding more best fit students for institutions like yours is critically important. CRM and data aggregation are sort of table stakes, and having reliable data, I think, probably in combination with the importance on CRM, importance is very high on that list. Across the aisle, so to speak, from a most effective capabilities, there's some continuity there with CRM importance, and I heard that loud and clear when I was at the conference in January. Many of you were working with industry leaders like Slate on the CRM side, and it's clear as well in just having conversations with a number of you that your teams are very focused on data quality and on making data-driven decisions. There's a whole slew of high-impact questions that are also listed in the top 7 most effective capabilities as well, around aid disbursement, best fit students, and admissions staff efficiency, which from a overall I'd say importance perspective as it relates to actually getting value from what you're doing with data, I think that's a very healthy signal. And again, analytical leadership was something else that was identified as being very effective across the group. This next slide is a little bit busy, but the idea here is to provide just a little bit more of a deep kind of a assessment of how your scores came back across importance and effectiveness. And you can see some of the patterns that start to emerge here, both on the importance and the overall effectiveness of as it relates to skills and abilities. Those tend to be towards the bottom for both importance and effectiveness. And you start to see some other patterns that begin to emerge around consistency across importance and effectiveness. That I think on paper make a lot of sense. That said, there were some, I think, some deltas that are worth identifying when you compare the importance and the overall effectiveness. The first of which is around more best fit students. That's clearly something that is paramount to your overall success in the roles that you have. From a Delta perspective, while it was in the top 5 as far as effective capabilities, it was not certainly as high as the overall importance that that particular capability is to the overall institutional success. Some of the other patterns that emerged around deltas that are interesting to look at around application, I think involves the ease of using data to report off of from a dashboard, I think creation capability. While that wasn't listed in the top 5, there was a delta between the importance that something like that offers and the overall effectiveness that you all have in actually using that type of a capability. And then, there were, I think, some general inconsistencies around long-term data planning and advanced analytics sophistication.
So here, the next thing we did was, based on your individual answers for each school, we were able to assign an overall score, from 1 to 5, which is partly based on the IIA methodology. So what you're seeing here is a distribution of how, all the 16 different institutions, how their overall scores look. So the higher the columns here, the more schools had a score in that range. So as you can see here, we have a lot that's sort of in that middle of the pack range, with a couple that, based on what they told us, feel that they are more, effective than most. So what we are able to do, and I'm sure Dave will mention this later, we do have individual assessments that, we're more than happy to share with you in an individual call, where we can walk you through your individual report and how you may have gotten the score that you've gotten. So moving on.
So, sort of continuing on with the pattern of really the survey results in more of a visual way, this particular visualization is a good one to use to better understand where there could be pockets of opportunity, where there could be some gaps as it relates to capability strength, and where there could be, some over-indexation as it relates to where you're investing from a capability perspective. As you look at the visualization in front of you, it's broken out into categories of high importance, low effectiveness, high importance, high effectiveness, low importance, low effectiveness, and low importance, high effectiveness. When you look at this particular graph, you can see that there's probably kind of an over-indexation of high importance, high effectiveness. I think sometimes when we see a pattern like that, at least from a analysis perspective, you start to wonder if there's a little bit of bias associated with making that assessment, right? I think if we were to do a larger assessment across an institution, you'd start to see some different patterns than what we see here. But that being said, some of the areas that do tend to stand out certainly involve skills and abilities. You can see that that's clearly an area of opportunity across all of the evaluations. I think there are also some patterns just around this idea that schools are doing a very good job of aggregating data, and they place a high degree of importance on data quality to make decisions. I think there's a question around the knowledge that folks have as it relates to more advanced analytics solutions that are available, and the long-term planning that's going into creating data-driven strategies. And so these next slides kind of dig into each of the pillars to look at some of the insights, some of which I may have just cited. But first digging into data quality and breaking down that graph in a way that's a little more systematic, you can see that some of the capabilities that are cited here kind of get to some of what I'm talking about as it relates to patterns. I think there's clearly a recognition that having reliable data is important and available, and that acquiring useful data from other departments is a challenge. for many of the institutions that are part of your cohort. Again, ease of reporting and dashboarding is something that probably had some mixed results across schools. As far as pillar number 2 is concerned, with high impact questions, it was clear just even in what I've shared with you already that there are a number of capabilities in this particular pillar that are perceived to be high importance, high effectiveness. Most of the schools within the cohort feel that they're effectively enrolling best fit students and offering the appropriate amount of aid. But there seems to be an overarching need for more effective utilization of marketing across institutions. In pillar number 3, leadership focus, it's clear in evaluating all the assessments that leadership at your institutions within the ELCA have a passion for making data-driven decisions, and having had a number of conversations with individual schools that are a part of the cohort, that's very evident to me as well, in less of a quantitative way and more of a qualitative way. But I think there is this sense that investment in long-term planning is kind of a laggard as it relates to actually kind of putting your money where your mouth is, for lack of a better analogy. Pillar number 3, I think I've already covered to a certain degree, but the skills and abilities pillar seems to be the pillar that is most underserved as it relates to effectiveness and importance. Most of the schools have shared through the assessment that they're fairly dependent upon consultants for analytics, and that there's very little in-house expertise. I mean, that's kind of natural to see with schools of your size, just given the expense that building in-house competencies can have. But that being said, that building this skill set does appear to be at odds with the overall leadership recognition of analytics being as important as it is. Pillar number 5 gets at technological tools. And I'm repeating some of what I've already said, but it's very clear that that CRM is critical, and that many of you have made the necessary investment in a CRM solution that you're leveraging on a very active and regular basis. That said, it does also appear on the flip side that many of the new technological tools that could be available to schools like yours, there seems to be a general lack of awareness of. And I think sometimes that may be a function of time constraints, prioritization, and marketplace noise. I'd be the first to say, speaking as somebody who works for a provider, I imagine you're probably hearing from 10 to 15 of folks like Steve or me on a daily basis, right? And everybody's talking about analytics, and that can just create a lot of marketplace noise. And sometimes that makes it difficult to conduct a true evaluation around what is real and what could help you versus what is sort of marketplace chatter. So last area from a assessment of your assessments is really more cross-pillar in nature. These are just some of the kind of salient insights we pulled out of really looking across the pillars and some of the scores that came back. It does appear that clearly that your leadership is committed to making data-driven decisions, but investment planning and skills do not appear yet to have sort of married up with that level of commitment that is stated. It's also very evident that data collection, data quality are a focus and a priority. Yet that does seem to be at odds with this apparent lack of knowledge of some of the newer technology that could be available to you to take things to a different level. And then the third point is that clearly consultants play a big role for many of the schools in the ELCA. I think there inherently can be trade-offs in making that that business decision. One of which is that you rely heavily upon somebody else who's not a part of your institution to provide you with some of the competencies that that could be developed internally or could be developed in working with products or solutions that really empower your folks to make decisions.
And our last slide here, everything that you've seen so far, we've been looking at the average survey results for the ELCA, which is this chart on the left side that Dave just walked through all the different individual pillars. If you choose to set up another meeting with Dave and Steve, where we can walk through your individual assessment, what you're going to see is something that's more specific to your university or college on the right side. So this is just an example here. But what we've actually done is taken that same average importance across the board. So, using the average importance answers that everyone here gave us to keep that on our y-axis, so the vertical that you're seeing on the right side. But for the x-axis, rather than looking at the average effectiveness for ELCA schools, we're going to be looking at your effectiveness in relation to the average effectiveness from each school. So what this actually gives you, and I know it's a little small on this screen, but if you look at the text in each corner of the quadrants, this is what makes it easier to understand the differences from the left chart to the right. Before we're just kind of reporting on what you felt was, as a group, more important or less, and more effective or less. But in the right, this ties back to one of those very first slides where the upper left quadrant are your high priorities. Upper right are where your organization may have a strength. Bottom right is where you may be potentially over allocating, and then the bottom left being your opportunistic areas for improvement. So using this, and we would dive deeper on an individual call. As you know, each of these little dots is a different capability. We're able to talk through and let you know where, based on your answers and the answers from the group, where certain capabilities fall on a chart like this, and where certain things you may be able to do to address them if need be. So it's a great way to learn a little bit more, get a little bit more out of the assessment that you did here. And sorry about that. Yeah, it's just the final piece to this whole puzzle.
And I would say, and thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I would say that one of the things that has been valuable for other institutions in using the individual assessment is this idea of having a benchmark, right? It gives you really the ability to compare your institution to the average. And when you're trying to make a business case around what it is that you should be doing with leadership, it could be one of several sources that you reference when you're thinking about making that case for why something would be important to invest in. So with that, I would love to open it up for questions or comments for the group. I'm hopeful that you found this to be valuable in some form, and like Steve said, Jeff said that we are happy to follow up at the appropriate time and with the appropriate interest with schools that would like to see more of an individualized assessment. So I'll just be more direct. I'll open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they'd like to share with the group here?
I've unmuted all the lines, so they should be free to talk.
Okay.
If, Derek, anything you'd like to offer for the benefit of the the cohort here? Questions, comments, going once, going twice.
Well, I'll jump in and just say that anybody that has, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is Brenda. I do have a question. It's hard because we all probably have different responses to, there is variance between the institutions, and so what I'm kind of wondering about is whether there are one or two major takeaways, or were there any surprises for you as you looked at these data? Did anything we responded with surprise you, or did we respond as you expected us to?
Brenda, this is Dave. I think for us, and this is always something that's surprising, but it is really more around the cross-pillar findings, and probably the first two in particular, right? And I don't know that surprise is the word I would use with a number or A around leadership. I think this is something that can be fairly common at a wide range of organizations and institutions, right? But there seems to be a real belief that there is a commitment to data and analytics, but some of the supporting and underlying infrastructure to actually deliver against that commitment, there seems to be a disconnect there. And then, I think for us, probably this is more of a self-serving finding, but nonetheless, it did stand out in the data to us, is that, for this group in particular, there is a very, I think, intense focus on data and data quality, yet, I think some of the more advanced applications that are available to take analytics to an entirely different level, is not something that appears to be as high on the radar as some that are involved in what you all are doing today. And that seems to be, a little bit of a disconnect for me when I start to think about that next level where you're going to get real value from analytics, and where I think, organizations in the private sector and schools that are embracing some of those more advanced forms of analytics and insights are actually taking advantage and creating competitive advantages for themselves.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the question.
Dave, this is Derek. Hey, sorry, I was started to talk and was muted, but I just wanted to thank everybody for jumping on here today and finding this time. I know it's busy as we're all squeezing in our own personal time out of the office and stuff. So thanks for getting back to me on all this stuff, and thanks to Dave and your team for sharing all this stuff with us.
Absolutely. And what I would say is that Steve Atkins is going to follow up with a copy of this presentation to all who are involved. And if you have interest in digging more deeply into your individual assessment, if you could let Steve know in your response, that would be very helpful. Our only ask on the flip side is that you'd be open to having a discussion about your assessment, and even be open to learning a little bit more about what we're doing with some schools today. We continue to be very excited about the possibility of working with schools, with Lutheran schools. We have yet to work with one from your cohort, though we've had some terrific conversations. So we're, I think the other piece I'd put out there is that we continue to honor the kind of specialized pricing considerations that would be available to schools that were at the conference that you all invited us to sponsor. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. And we hope to talk to you all or individually in the future.
we look forward to it.
Great. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.